All right, moving along for our last storyteller of the evening. We'd like to have our favorite fan right here. Richard, come on up. Talk to us about Out on a Limb.
Before you start the timer, I want to say, first of all, I've had a chance to know Piper now, 6-8 months? Something like that, and her courage to follow something she felt very, very dear to her has inspired me to do something similar, not similar, but follow a similar path for myself with a friend of mine in Guatemala. It was amazing. And thank you for your courage, and that's part of what Real Stories is about, is be inspired by those people around. So now I'll share with you my story for this evening. And how many of you have had a dream of flying? Everybody. Oh, great. And if you haven't had a dream of flying, maybe you saw that little film by Cameron, came out about this time last year. Great movie, had the blue people flying on the backs of dragons. And you probably sat there and you said, wow, wouldn't that be cool to step off a cliff and fly? Wouldn't it be neat to, soar through the top of a waterfall and to float among the clouds? Well, one of the ways I define myself is the hang glider, and I do just that. And hang gliding for me, is not a daredevil sport. It's not bungee jumping. It's not base jumping. It's not skydiving, where you just plummet to the ground. For me, I've been able to experience some amazing things in my life through flying. It's become a very, very quintessential part of how I define myself. And to give you a few examples of things I've been able to do, my longest flight was 5.5 hours. My longest distance flight out and back was over 100 miles. My personal altitude gain was over 3 miles. I was 2 miles above Lake Tahoe. And I've actually flown through the mist of Yosemite Falls from the outside looking down. It's an amazing experience, but it's not the physical accomplishments, but more the spiritual. It's when you fly, when you stand at the edge of a cliff and you make that commitment to a launch. You have 2 to 4 steps, and you can't change your mind. Once you commit to that launch, that's it. You're gone. And you can't make one step and then say, I'm going to stop. Well, Glacier Point is 4,000 feet straight down. It's kind of a long ways to realize how much of a mistake you just made. And what got me into this sport was, back in the 70s, I saw a PBS broadcast that had these guys hang gliding in Big Sur. And they launched off the top of a mountain, and they flew over the top of the redwoods and across along the coast, and they landed on these little pieces of ground next to the highway. And I thought, wow, I want to do that. I mean, that just something called me to do that. So I searched around. I found this hang gliding school at the time called Superfly. And the instructors wore bell-bottoms, and it was just about what you would expect. The gliders looked like lawn furniture with, tarps duct taped to them. And that was the beginning of the sport. That was the mid-70s when the sport began. And the entire instruction that I got was, run down the sand dune, don't land in the ocean, don't crash. And I did. And I got hooked on the sport. And bought a glider myself and taught myself basically how to fly. I had a mentor in the sport that helped me raise my skill level. And I got to the point where I was one of the most advanced rated pilots in the United States. I was flying several times a week all over the western United States, and just it became an essential part of who I was. I mentored in Yosemite, and I don't know how many countless flights there. It was just incredible. When you fly, the thing that's amazing about it is you can't think about it. You can't think about your day-to-day life. You can't think about anything. You have to sort of let yourself go and be part of this glider and essentially dance with the wind. And it's kind of hard to explain, but my mom is a professional ballet dancer, and she said, why do you do this? And I said, well, it's the only time I'm beautiful. It's the only time I'm graceful. Other than that, I'm a klutz, right? So as the sport advanced and I continued on with the sport, the technology changed, the gliders got better, they also got bigger. And bigger and bigger and bigger. And I had at the time what one would consider to be, well, I was actually nicknamed, I had the Jurassic glider. It was the largest single-person glider built. It was a Magic 177, had a 43-foot wingspan. To give you an idea what that is, if you turn it up on edge, it's taller than a 4-story building. And it was huge, but it was incredibly fun to fly, but after the end of the day of flying, you sort of look like Popeye. Big muscles. It was hard to fly. At the same time, what was going on in my life is I was married, I had a family, and then the company I was working for got downsized, outsized, right-sized, and I ended up moving, and something had to give. And I began to fly less and less and have less airtime. And one day, I had transferred from living in Los Gatos, I had to move to Santa Rosa. Managed to finally get the day free, go down to Fort Bunce in San Francisco, meet up with some friends of mine to fly, and there's a voice inside your head. Yes, we hear voices too. Ours aren't drug-induced, but we hear voices. And that little voice will tell you, not today. And it won't scream, it won't shout. It will tell you, not today. And anybody who flies, anybody whose feet leave the ground, hot air balloon pilots, parachute jumpers, skydivers, whatever you want to call them, people pilot, passenger planes and jet planes, anybody who flies will tell you they hear the same voice. And if you hear that voice, it whispers in your ears, not today, you don't fly. It doesn't matter what it is. Well, I wasn't going to listen to it this particular day. I've listened to it all my life, but I wasn't going to listen to it this particular day. And the wind was strong, but not quite strong enough for me to say, no, I'm not going to fly today. I really think I can do this. And I launched, had a great flight for about an hour at Fort Funston. But as the day went on, the wind got stronger and stronger. And I thought, I'll just make 2 more passes at the ridge, right? I'll just blast on down to the end of the ridge, hook it around, come back, no problem. In that length of time, the wind had gotten to the point where it was too strong for my glider. And it was difficult to fly. And as I set up for my landing, I knew that I had blown. I knew that I was too high. I knew my approach was wrong, but I was tired and I was fatigued, and I said, I don't care. I'm going to get this glider down, and I'm going to go home. I should have flown through. The little voice inside my head said, go around, do it again. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I caught turbulence in the wind, 75 feet up. The glider inverted and slammed into the ground upside down. Now, the paramedics, when they showed up, gave me a choice. I had a choice of going to the hospital either in an ambulance or a helicopter. I always wanted to ride in a helicopter. But I thought, under the circumstances, looking straight up in a gurney was probably not how I wanted to get there, so I opted out for the ambulance. As it turned out, I had sprained the ligaments that hold my hips together, and I was unable to walk for 6 months. Completely unable to walk for 6 months. So that first step that I took was amazing. I was like, wow, I'm going to walk again. This is great. Yeah, I know. And 18 months later, I was finally at the point where I could walk again. I did buy another glider, but life continued on. And I had a family to deal with. I had responsibilities. I had jobs. The stress of life, I gained a phenomenal amount of weight. And I was outside the safe limit of my glider, and there my glider sat in storage for almost 15 years. Last year, I had some significant changes in my life, and most of it negative. I'd lost everything. Previous to that, I had a divorce and lost even more than that. I'd lost so much of my life over the years, and last year I lost just about everything that I held valuable to myself. But one of the advantages of that is I lost weight as well. I stopped eating, and I lost 8 pounds, which put me well back into my safe flying weight. And I had a choice. I started to look around at my life, and I said, I need to regain some of the things that are essentially me, some of the things that were who I was. And I'd flown for 20 years. I mean, that was an essential part of who I was, very calming and wonderful part of who I was. So I called a friend of mine, a good mentor in the sport. His name's Yves Tallchief. He's a full-blooded American Osage Indian. His wife says that his name literally doesn't translate to tall chief, but man who thinks he's important. But Yves is very important to me. He's been a sensei of mine in the sport. I called him up and I said, Yves, I want to fly again. He says, okay. And he checked me out. He made sure that I could put my glider together, that I could pre-flight it, that my equipment was still in good shape, even though it had been dusty for a long time. We went back to Fort Funston. And I stood at the end of the cliff. And mind you, Fort Funston, if you guys have never been there, it's a 350-foot cliff straight down. Now, at low tide, there's 20 feet of beach. My glider at this time is now 38 feet across. At high tide, there's no beach. Today, there was no beach. And so I stood at the edge of the cliff and braced myself. Now, the nice thing about hang gliding is that if, for instance, you're standing at the launch and there's 3 guys behind you, no one's going to push you to go. They all know that you're going to make that commitment to step off the edge of the cliff. So I stood there for the longest time, realizing that a few yards over my left shoulder was where I had crashed. That was not a good, I hate this crash. More abrupt than anticipated landing. And I stood at the launch, I lifted the wings, I let the wind catch it, I made the first step, the second step, third step, my feet didn't hit the ground, I was airborne. And it came back to me in a heartbeat, and I was flying. As I had flown the day before, and I had a great flight, it was over an hour long. I cruised up and down the ridge, I was cutting up the air, having a blast, and then I realized that I had to land. Now, the last time I landed in Funston, it wasn't the greatest thing in the world, and I had insurance then. I didn't have health insurance this time. I'm getting this blasting light. Give me 2 seconds, I'll be done with it. So I watched the other pilots land, and I set up my approach, and I knew I had one shot at this. Came around, set up my landing, and I had an absolutely perfect stepless landing at the exact spot